Hello again. Welcome to the afternoon of day 16 in the uh, Massachusetts versus Karen Reed trial. The Karen Reed's accused of, that's my dog. She gets stuff in her throat. She's accused of running her boyfriend over in the middle of the night and leaving him out in the cold to die. Don't believe it. In the morning, we had a long conversation with Jennifer McCabe, and lasted most of the morning. And then prosecution brought in Kerry Roberts, along with Jennifer McCabe and Kerry Roberts and Karen Reed. They were all the first ones on the scene to discover John O'Keefe on the ground, on his back, covered in snow, barely breathing, if breathing at all. Pretty darn cold by then. And so Kerry Roberts is continuing the story. And we'll take it from there. So far, Kerry Roberts is a believable witness, especially when she started talking about finding John O'Keefe's body. She considered him a good friend. She helped take care of, she helped him with his nephew that he was in care of, getting him to games and different things. And then when she was describing what she was doing to try to revive John, she was visibly emotionally upset. And she's the only one who, in an appropriate manner, was visually and understandably upset. In my mind, in my opinion. And of course, this is all just my opinion. I am the snarky juror, after all, and I can make remarks like this. Defense keeps trying to take it away from me, but I'm the one who's supposed to be snarky. So let's go ahead and get into this. I don't think it'll be very long today, but we'll see. So let me bring it up and get it going. Excuse me. Yeah.
All right, Mr. Lally, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
So if I could take you back just for a moment, I apologize for this, but just for a moment back to when you first, where Mr. O'Keefe is on the grass, and at any point in time when you observed him, what, if any, observations did you make as far as how Mr. O'Keefe was dressed at that time?
Was he dressed?
Yes.
He had jeans on. I couldn't really tell because he was covered in snow. But I know that I think he had 2 layers on because when the defendant lifted his shirt.
Do you recall if any one of those layers was like a winter jacket or any kind of heavy coat or anything like that?
No.
I'm sorry, no, you don't recall, or no?
No, it was not a coat.
T-shirt and an overshirt, I'm guessing.
Now, take it back to when
I'm going to munch on pretzels.
you were in front of the house and Mr. O'Keefe is in the back of the ambulance, and at some point in time that ambulance leaves. Is that correct?
Correct.
And do you know where the ambulance was going?
Good Samaritan Hospital.
And following that, you mentioned that Ms. McCabe went inside the house, correct?
Yes.
And do you recall what it was that caused her to go inside the house?
No, I'll allow that. Not what anyone said.
I think she was going to wake her sister.
And
When dogs barking?
was there anybody else that beyond sort of first responders or police officers, things like that, any other sort of civilian people show up that you recall?
Matt showed up at some point. Jen's husband, Matt.
And that was before you left, is that correct?
Yes.
And just to be clear, you had, we'll get to this more in a moment, but you had left from the house once, come back, and then left again?
Yes.
And when her husband, Matt McCabe, showed up, which of those times was that?
I think he was there when I left the first time.
And did you have any conversation with him?
I just said, he said, I said, I'm going to get the O'Keefes. He said, do you want me to come with you? And I said, no. So he went in the house.
And when you left, who, if anyone, initially when you left, who, if anyone, left with you?
I left with Karen Reed.
And as you're leaving your car, you're driving, is that correct?
Yes.
Where is Miss Reed in the car at that point?
Say it again.
Where was Miss Reed in your car at that point?
In the passenger seat.
And as you were leaving, what, if anything, were the two of you doing or talking about, or what was going on when you left that first?
As we were leaving, she was saying to me, if anything happens to John, I'm going to kill myself. You need to take care of these kids.
And how did you respond?
He's not going to die. No one's doing anything of that nature, or something of that nature, I said.
And as far as you're driving away, Chapman, and you're facing towards Cedar Crest, is that right?
Yes.
And so when you left, are you following in that sort of same direction towards Cedar Crest?
I took a right onto Cedar Crest.
And then where did you go from there?
And then I got to Dedham Street, and I went to take a right. And then Officer Good let me go to pick up the O'Keefes to take them. I had to give him my phone number so that he could get in touch with me if he needed to. So he did call, and he said, do you have Miss Reed with you? And I said, yes. And he said, please bring her back. Her parents have called in a suicide. They said she's saying she's suicidal, so they want her to be sectioned.
And so coming back to that in a moment, but before you had left the scene, you hadn't talked to any police officers or anything at that time, correct?
No, other than my name and phone number, but no.
So you gave them your information and then said, I have to go pick up the O'Keefes.
Yes.
So you get that call from Officer Good, and then you come back to the house, is that right?
Yes.
And during any of that time, you recall the defendants, I know you had mentioned she spoke to Erin O'Keefe. Was there anybody else that the defendant spoke to or talked to while you were with her in the car?
She spoke to her mother. And then I ended up taking the phone and speaking to her mother, and I gave her my phone number, and I said, I'm going to go to the hospital. She said, please make sure she does not have her purse. She has medication in her purse. I don't want her to take.
And then when you arrived back at the scene, what happened then?
She just got out of the car and walked to the ambulance.
And who, if anyone, did she walk in? By she, you mean the defendant?
I'm sorry, yes.
And who, if anyone, did the defendant walk from your car to the ambulance with?
She just walked. I think she just walked by herself. I had her phone because I had been talking to her mother. So then one of the first responders came over and said, do you have her phone? And I said, yes. Her mother said, make sure she does not have her purse.
And then following that conversation with one of the first responders, where did you go?
I went to go pick up the O'Keefes.
And as far as your drive from Canton, you went to where do the O'Keefes live?
Braintree.
So your drive from Canton to Braintree, and then subsequently from Braintree to Brockton. What, if anything, did you observe about sort of the driving conditions at that point?
I was actually on the phone with Katie Camerano, and I spun out, did a complete spun a couple times on 93, right near the Braintree exit, so that when I got to the O'Keefes, that we went back roads to Brockton because I didn't want to go on the highway.
And as far as the O'Keefes, as far as in your car from Braintree to Brockton, that was both John's mother and father?
Correct.
And at some point you get to the Good Samaritan Hospital in Brockton, correct?
Correct.
And do you know about what time it was that you got there?
I don't know.
When you arrived, where is it that you and the O'Keefes sort of go within the hospital?
John's brother Paul had already arrived. And then we all walked in. We were in the waiting area. John's cousin actually works on the switchboard. We had been talking to her on the way in because with COVID restrictions, we didn't know if we were going to be able to get in or, so she had come out from the switchboard, her office, because she knew there had been an accident. So she came out to greet her family. And then I asked her to take me to the bathroom to clean up and to the chapel.
And why was it that you had to go?
Say it again.
Why was it that you had to go clean up?
Because I had blood on my hands.
Now, Ms. Roberts, you mentioned that during part of the drive from Canton to Braintree, you spoke to Ms. Camerano, correct?
Yes.
And during either that drive or the subsequent drive from Braintree to Brockton, who, if anyone else, did you speak to over the phone?
Karen called me repeatedly from the ambulance asking if I was going to come to the hospital. Then she called when the O'Keefes were in the car and said she dropped him off at a party. And Mrs. O'Keefe said, "You just left him." And Mr. O'Keefe said, "Leave her alone. She's been through enough." She called a few times while we were on the ride. And then she called a lot when we were at the hospital asking if I knew anything, if he was dead, is he dead? She would hang up and then call back, hang up and then call back.
And if you know about how many times?
At least 10.
And that same sort of phraseology that she was using on scene as far as if she's dead, she repeated that in the phone calls at the hospital.
Yes.
Now, once you arrive at the hospital and you're able to clean up a little bit, where did you go from there? What happened?
I went to the chapel and I said a prayer. And then I went in and talked to John's cousin, and she said that Dr. Rice was going to ask to meet with the family and that they would be told how John was doing and that they would bring John's family back to see John. So when I came out, they were being called in by Dr. Rice, and I sat in the waiting area.
And after some period of time sitting in the waiting area, what happened?
Mrs. O'Keefe came out and told me John was gone. And then she asked if I wanted to see him. So I did, because I figured it would be better than when I last saw him. Maybe he was cleaned up, but it was not. It was worse.
Sorry, ma'am, but as far as say that it was worse, back into a room where John was, is that right?
Yes.
And what did you see?
He was in a neck brace, and both eyes were huge. Whereas when I found him, it was only one, but they were like black, almost like filled with, I don't know, blood or fluid. They were huge.
Beyond what you observed in his eyes, what, if anything else, did you see on John's body as you were?
He had scratches on his arm,
Do you recall which arm it was?
his right arm.
Do you recall where on his arm?
Like here.
Around the
Does that
elbow.
look like the witness is pointing to her forearm?
Yes.
An elbow.
Following that, as far as going in to see John, what happened?
We came back out to the waiting area. Mrs. O'Keefe wanted to get his necklace off, but I couldn't get it. So her and Paul went back in to get the necklace off. And Karen had called me at some point from the hospital and said, "My father's going to be coming. Can you just keep a lookout for him?" So I said, so when Mr. Reed, her father, walked in, Mr. O'Keefe recognized him and he said, "That's Karen's father." So I went over and I said, "Mr. Reed, Mr. O'Keefe would like to speak to you." And then I just stood there. I didn't know what to do.
And at some point, did you leave from the hospital?
I did. I took Mr. O'Keefe in my car, and Paul took Mrs. O'Keefe in his.
And where did the two vehicles, where did you?
I dropped Mr. O'Keefe off at John's house, and then I went home.
And without getting into too much detail as far as the road conditions that you described earlier. How were they?
Was absolutely horrible. I told Mr. O'Keefe, if you see a front door in your vision, we are about to hit a house because I can't see where we're going. And my windshield wiper broke.
That doesn't help.
Now, so you dropped Mr. O'Keefe off at John's house on Meadows, is that right?
Yes,
And Ms. Reed's vehicle, was that still there at that point?
I think so. I don't recall, but I think so.
And then you went home, is that correct?
Yes.
Later on that day or that afternoon, who, if anyone, came to your house to speak to you in regard to what?
There were 2 officers, but I don't remember their names.
And do you recall which department they were from?
The state police.
As far as the officers that came to your house and spoke to you, you don't recall their names, is that correct?
I don't.
Recall if either one of them was a trooper proctor?
It was not.
And where in your house did you speak?
In the dining room.
And did they speak to anybody else at your house at that time?
My husband.
And as far as when they spoke to you and they spoke to your husband, where were you? Starting with yourself, do you know where your husband was when the troopers were speaking to you?
I don't know where he was, but he wasn't in the room with me.
And same as far as when the troopers were speaking with your husband, where were you?
I was not in the room.
Following that, did you have occasion to speak to any other troopers or members of the state police at any point in time afterward?
I've only spoken to Michael Proctor one time. It was from Jen's house.
And when was that?
I don't know, maybe a couple days later, because Jen and I were re-going over what everything had happened. Mrs. O'Keefe had advised us to make a timeline because she said this could be a while. You guys aren't going to remember something years from now. So sit down, write down what you remember. And I, at that point, said, well, when she first called, she said he was dead. And Jen said, I don't think you've told them that. So Michael Proctor called, or she was on the phone with him, or I don't even know. And I said, could I speak to him? So I told him so that somebody had it documented.
So as far as Trooper Proctor was concerned, that phone conversation, is that the only contact that you had with Trooper Proctor?
Yes.
And if you recall, was it February 1st or so that you met with some troopers at Mr. Cave's house?
State Trooper who?
At some point, did you meet with troopers at Mr. Cave's house?
Yes.
And if you know, was that on or around a couple days later, like February 1st or so?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I can't be sure.
Were either of those troopers that you met at Mr. Cave's house, were either of those troopers Trooper Proctor?
No.
And do you recall where within Mr. Cave's house you spoke to them?
In the living room.
And beyond yourself and the troopers that you spoke to, was there anybody else in the room with you when you spoke to them?
No.
And at some point, either then or subsequent to then, was there any request made by any trooper from the state police in regard to your cell phone?
To my cell phone, yes.
And do you recall if it was that date or a later date?
It was not that day. I think it was the next day. It was within the next 2 days. They wanted to clone my phone.
And did they advise you of anything or give you any form that you had to fill out and execute prior to doing that?
Yes, I had to fill out a form.
And as far as your phone was concerned, were there any restrictions or anything that you gave to them as far as what they could look at or what they could clone or what they could do with your phone?
No.
And as far as how sort of that process works, as far as the cell phone extraction or anything, do you know anything about that?
No.
And do you recall how long it was that you were without your phone at the time you handed it over to them to whenever you got back?
Well, they took both of our phones at the same time, and we didn't get them back for like 7 or 8 hours.
And just to be clear, when you say both of our phones, you're
Jen.
who else's?
Jen's phone and my phone.
Now, At some point or at any point, did you give any kind of interview or have any conversation with any officer from the Canton Police in regard to what happened that day?
No.
And are you familiar with a Canton officer named Michael Lang?
Yes.
How do you know?
My daughter and his daughter are friends.
So beyond your daughters being friends, is that someone that you know or that you socialize with or anything like that?
No, I mean, they've come over to my house, his wife and him, one time, but we don't hang out with them socially. His wife and I are friends.
Now, at some point around this date, around January 29th, well, let me ask you, turning to the next day of January 30th, do you recall what you did that day?
We went over to the O'Keefe's house, my daughter, Jen, and Jen's daughter, and myself.
And following that, do you recall where you went?
My daughter wanted to get dropped off to her friend's house at Mike Link's.
And so after leaving the O'Keefe's house, is it still the same as far as yourself, your daughter, Ms. McCabe, and her daughter?
Her daughter stayed at the O'Keefe's.
And as far as Ms. McCabe was concerned, was it after dropping your daughter off, did you go anywhere with Ms. McCabe after that?
I just stopped at Mike Lank's house, I think, and then we went home.
And so when you got to your daughter's friend's house, who, if anyone, did you speak to?
Mike's wife came out to the car to see how I was and how the O'Keefes were, and so she talked to us for a little, just asking how everyone was.
And if you know, ma'am, do you know about how long that conversation was?
I mean, I'm a talker, so it's probably a while. I'd say at least 45 minutes.
Was that a conversation like through the window, or did she get in the car? Or, you know?
I think she got in the car. She was in the back seat because it was freezing.
From that conversation, do you recall anything beyond sort of how people were doing, or anything? Did you discuss anything about sort of what you had seen or what you had heard the day before on the 29th?
I don't recall. It was just a regular conversation. Well, not regular, obviously, but she was more concerned how the O'Keefes were doing, how the kids were doing.
And then after you left from the Lang's house, where did you go? Where did you and Ms. McCabe go?
I don't know. I'm assuming home.
I may have a moment.
Yes.
Yara, may we approach this briefly?
Okay.
Gotta clear it before you speak it, I guess. New witness.
Okay. All right.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. All right.
That's John O'Keefe's brother. He's not as glaring today as he normally is.
Sorry, Yara, one moment. I have no further questions for this witness, Your Honor.
Okay. Ms. Little?
No questions, Your Honor.
Okay. All right.
Oh, thank you.
Your next witness, Mr. Lally?
Yes, Your Honor. The Commonwealth will call Ms. Laura Sullivan to the stand.
And sometimes they put it down here and sometimes they don't. Why is that?
And Mr. Lally, I'd like you to tell me when you want me to give that instruction.
I think it's,
So just wave it for me, flag it for me.
sure.
Just wing it. Sullivan. Don't remember what they said her first name was. I know I'm actually taking notes. For all the good it's going to do, I can't read my own handwriting. Let me try to fast forward. Too late. Here she comes.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the evidence you give the court and jury in the case now and hearing to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, Mr. Lally, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name?
Laura Sullivan, Sullivan.
And where do you live?
Oh, hey.
Pembroke, Massachusetts.
And how long have you lived in
Almost 6 years.
Pembroke? And who, if anyone, do you live in Pembroke with?
I live with my boyfriend and our 3 children. 2 stepchildren that are with us half the time, and then my son, Ben.
And your son, how old is he?
He's 10.
I'm sorry.
10. Sorry.
Oh, that's fine. And your stepchildren, how old are they?
15 and 13.
Now, do you work, ma'am?
I do.
What do you do?
I work in human resources.
How long have you been doing
Just over 6 years.
it? Ma'am, if I could turn your attention to New Year's Eve of 2021 into New Year's Day of 2022. Do you recall that time frame?
I do.
And do you recall where you were?
I was in Aruba.
And if you could explain to the jury sort of how often was that a regular trip that you did around that time of year?
Yeah. We've been doing a trip like around that time for, I'd say, 5 or 6 years. This will be our 6th year, I believe.
And over the course of those 5 or 6 years that you've done that, when you say sort of we, how did that start and how has that expanded, if at all?
So we've been going, Josh and I have been going to Aruba for years. In 2021, post-COVID, we decided to bring our children. We had never gone with them before. And since it was post-COVID, a lot of people are kind of stir crazy. And a group of our friends jumped on board. And so we went from just the 5 of us going to approximately 60 people.
And as
Big
far
jump.
as yourself and or the other people, how, is this all at one sort of facility or how were the bookings?
So we all stayed at the Renaissance, which is in downtown, and we buy timeshares. So it was a timeshare resort where we would purchase weeks that people owned. And so if they weren't going for that year, we would buy a week. So we were able to get, I think it was something, close to 20 rooms for all of us to go for the same week.
And as far as the planning in regard to that year in particular, when did that planning process sort of begin?
It starts approximately a year in advance because the rooms go on sale almost immediately because people want to get rid of them. So I would say it was probably around January of 2021 that we booked our room for that year.
And once you had booked your room, as far as the family and friends group that you were talking about, how was that sort of put out to them, like through what means?
We would, I would post on Facebook. More rooms are available for Aruba if anybody was interested in going. So the
timeshare owners would reach out to me directly. Is there anybody else who would want to go? And we would look for any interested either friends or what have you to join our trip.
And so at some point in time over the summer of 2021, say July or August or so, was there someone who, a friend of yours that reached out in regard to joining or possibly coming on the trip?
Yeah, I received a text message from John O'Keefe interested in learning more information about our trip.
And if you could describe to the jury sort of how did you know John?
I met John in May of 2013. I met him at a bar in South Boston with, he was with Pat Rogers at the time. Post meeting John, I started dating Pat, and my son's father is Pat Rogers. And
I could stop you there just
Yep.
a moment. So as far as John O'Keefe and your son's father, Pat Rogers, did you know or did you come to know sort of what they did for a living?
yeah, they were both Boston police officers.
And did you know sort of what the relationship was beyond co-workers of Mr. O'Keefe and Ms. Rogers?
Yeah. They were best friends.
So at some point following that meeting in 2013, you began to date Mr. Rogers, is that right?
Correct.
And what happened?
So in July of 2013, I became pregnant. And in November of 2013, Pat committed suicide.
Wow.
And okay.
Yeah.
Following that, how would you describe sort of the relationship with Mr. O'Keefe, or how did it evolve?
So in November of 2013, I was on a work trip, and I had not had the best conversation with Pat. It was kind of, it just didn't feel right. And I called John and said, you need to go find him. I can't get a hold of him. He won't answer his phone. And so John left his nephew's birthday party and called a bunch of people on the way. And ultimately, Pat was found in the basement of his house. And John was there immediately following, but he was the one that found people to go find Pat. Immediately following that, John never really left my side, as a support system.
Because that's the kind of guy he
At some
was.
point following that, you had your son.
Yeah.
And before or after that, at some point, did you have a conversation with Mr. O'Keefe in regard to your son?
It was his birthday, December of 2013, and we went to the Playwright, which is where we had all met. And I gave him a card and I asked him to be Ben's godfather, and he said yes.
And in relation to your son, was Mr. O'Keefe, was John involved in your son's life?
Yes, very much so.
And how so?
He was every birthday, Christmas. He was always in contact. He was the first person in my delivery room after I gave birth. He was a constant. He was a connection to Pat, and always making sure that Ben was taken care of, in the sense of being there to tell stories or what have you from his relationship with Pat.
And through sort of his relationship with you and your son, Mr. O'Keefe also become familiar with your family as well?
Yeah.
And in regard to your family, was there some kind of term, or how would they refer to Mr. O'Keefe?
The Godfather. He was called the Godfather to almost everybody.
Now, ma'am, if I can turn your attention back to that summer of 2021, you received a text from Mr. O'Keefe, is that right?
Mhm.
And
So I'm
well,
sorry, you do have to say yes or no.
Oh,
for-
sorry. Yes.
after you received that text, did you reach out to Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes, I gave him a call because I was excited. I was immediately excited. I gave him a call, explained to him that we had a group of rooms. We were going with, I don't even know the number at that time that had, signed up to go, but it was a lot of kids. It was all of our friends, and that they would have a great time.
And from that, did he give you any sense or say anything about who from was it just yourself, or like who was coming along?
He had mentioned that it would be the kids, and he said Karen would be joining him as well.
And at that point, at some point subsequent to that, you knew him to be referring to Karen, correct?
Yes.
At that point, had you met Karen Reed? Did you know who that was?
I had not. I knew that they were dating, but I had never met Karen, no.
And in addition to himself, it would have been Mr. O'Keefe, Ms. Reed, the defendant, and his niece and nephew, Patrick Taylor.
Correct, yes.
And if you know, in relation to your son, as far as Mr. O'Keefe's nephew, Patrick, where are they in relation as far as age?
They're like three years apart. 3 years apart.
Now, when you have that phone conversation with Mr. O'Keefe, what, if any, interest does he show as far as going?
After asking a couple questions, I could hear Karen in the background, and he put Karen on the phone, and that was the first time I had spoken to her. He basically said, just talk to her so you can answer her questions.
Do you recall what kind of questions they were, or what it was about?
She was interested in the room setup, how many people could sleep in a room, and how the room is set up. You have a king size bedroom, and then there's a kitchen area, and then there's a living room that has a pull-out couch. And I explained that it's a 4-person occupancy room, and you could get a roll-away bed as well.
And following that conversation, when was the next time, if at all, that you had any conversation with Mr. O'Keefe and or Ms. Reed in regard to the room?
So during that conversation, Karen mentioned that she needed her own bathroom and she needed her own space, and that she wanted 2 rooms. And so I put them in contact with a woman that I knew had 2 rooms for them to, figure that piece out. I don't handle any of that. I put people in contact with whoever owns the rooms. I put them in contact with the woman who had the 2 rooms, and I know that they had, paid her relatively quickly. I mentioned to John that the rooms, I couldn't promise that the rooms would be next to each other, and they weren't. They were on opposite sides of the hotel, but they got 2 rooms.
And when you say opposite sides of the hotel, where sort of where those rooms were in relation to each other, and who stayed in which room?
So the pool and lobby is in the center, and then the hotel comes like this, and there are pool walkout rooms on the first floor of each. And Karen and John were on this side, and the kids were on this side, and they both had walkout rooms.
And as far as sort of front door to front door, do you know about how far away they were from each other?
I would say, steps wise, maybe 200. But the hotel is it's small enough, but it was separated by a lobby, the front entrance, the outside entrance.
Now, with regard to your arrival, when was it that you arrived in your room?
So the timeshare rooms run Friday to Friday. So we were booked for the 31st through the 7th. Josh's birthday is December 30th. So we went down as a family a day early. And we had friends who were already down there since Christmas. John's timeshare room woman reached out and said, hey, we're leaving early if you want to arrive early. So him, Karen, and the kids actually came down on the 30th as well. They were on the flight following us. And then the rest of the 60-ish people, however many were there, showed up on the 31st.
And so from that first day that you arrived there, as far as when you got there on the 30th, when was the first time that you saw John, or when was the first time that you saw anyone from that?
It was, we were at the pool, so it was not long after they had landed. He texted me and said, we're here. And Ben and I jumped out of the pool and went to the lobby to see him. And then on the way back from the lobby, I saw somebody banging on the window on the left-hand side of the rooms, and I didn't know who it was. And then I saw Kaylee, and I was like, oh, well, that must be Karen.
And again, was this the first time that you had seen Karen face-to-face or met Ms. Reed?
Yes.
And just for clarity purposes, as far as Ms. Reed is concerned, you see her in the courtroom today?
Yes.
Can you just identify as to where she's seated or an article of clothing that she's
She's right there.
wearing? Just has to record reflect identification.
Okay.
Thank you. Now, after you see this person bang on the window and you recognize Kaylee, what happened?
She came out. She gave me a big hug, said, it's nice to meet you. I've heard so much about you. I recognized you from pictures.
And following along from there, what happened then as far as the day was concerned?
So as I mentioned, it was Josh's birthday. We had already made plans to go out for dinner. Our friends who had been there since Christmas have a 17-year-old daughter who watched our children so we could go out for dinner. I mentioned it to John. I said, we'll just add you to the reservation. You can join us for dinner. The kids can stay with Chloe. And they said, absolutely. So we all went out for dinner that evening to Screaming Eagle.
And Screaming Eagle, where is that in relation to the hotel, the rents?
It's probably about a 15-ish minute cab ride.
And when you arrived there, what, if anything, do you recall about sort of the dinner or how it went?
So we were sitting outside on the patio. It was Karen, myself, our friend Laura. Across from Laura was her husband, Dave. Josh was in front of me, and John was in front of Karen.
And what, if anything, specific you recall about dinner or sort of what happened at dinner?
So we, the waiter came over. He started taking drink orders. Karen placed her order. I placed mine. Laura placed hers. Dave placed his. And then Josh ordered a dirty martini with blue cheese stuffed olives.
Okay.
I'll allow it. I don't know where it's going, and you can move to strike unless you wanted to see me, Mr. United. Okay.
Yeah, where is this going? So Mr. Yannetti will be doing the cross.
So Ms. Sullivan, turning back to at the restaurants, the drinks that are ordered, people have what they have. And at the end of the evening, as far as the bill comes at some point, correct?
Correct.
And what, if anything, do you recall about that?
Karen had paid the bill prior to us receiving it.
Well, that was nice of her.
What, if any, reaction did you or anyone have in regard to it?
The entire table was kind of taken aback, said it wasn't necessary, wanted to Venmo or give cash or something along those lines. And she declined, saying that she was honored to be there and wanted to pay for it.
Turning your attention to the following day, what, if anything, do you recall about the next day being that would have been, I'm sorry, 31st, is that correct?
Yes.
So turning your attention to December 31st, 2021, what, if anything, do you recall about that day in specific regard to Mr. O'Keefe and Mr.
John was very vocal on the 30th on how he just wanted to sit in the pool and watch the Alabama game.
And he was a pretty big Alabama fan, is that correct?
Yes.
And so over the course of that day, what, if any, interaction did you have with either, starting with Mr. O'Keefe, what, if any, interaction did you have with him?
I saw him in the pool. I know he was sitting at the pool bar watching the game with Josh. I saw the kids. I recall seeing Karen. I don't remember if we spoke or not. But it was mostly in the pool because we were waiting for the rest of our friends to show up.
Now, amongst the rest of your friends that showed up, do you have any siblings?
I do.
And how many siblings do you
I have 2.
have? And brother or sister?
I have a younger brother and a younger sister,
And with reference to your younger sister, what's her name?
Marietta.
And how much younger than you is Marietta?
She's 10 years younger than me.
And was Marietta Sullivan, was she coming in on that day as well?
She was.
And do you recall about what time it was that she arrived or that she came to the hotel? When was the first time you saw her?
It's tough to remember, but I want to say everybody showed up on one of the first or second flights that came out of Boston. So I would say she was there by 1 p.m.
And if you recall, what, if any, plans were there as far as dinner was concerned on that evening in New Year's Eve?
So what we tend to do is book reservations, and if people are interested in joining, they can join us. And that night we had approximately 40 people going to have dinner on the beach at Moomba Beach. Around, I want to say it was like 7 o'clock. We had our reservations for.
And did Mr. O'Keefe and the defendant, Ms. Reed, join you for dinner that evening?
They did not know.
Now, let me take a step back just for a moment. As far as Ms. Reed was concerned, prior to your arrival in Aruba, did you have her phone number or did you have any way of contacting her?
No.
And when was it that you got Ms. Reed's phone number?
John had added her and I and Chloe to a group text the night that we had gone out for dinner to make sure that we could all communicate with Chloe to make sure the kids were okay.
So you got her phone number in relation to watching kids as far as Patrick and Kelly and your children and everybody.
Correct.
Now, if you recall, you go out to dinner, you think the reservation was about 7 or so. Do you recall about what time it was that you got back to the hotel?
I want to say it was around 9:30, 10 o'clock by the time my group got back. I know there was a couple different seatings. So we probably got back around like 9:30, 10 o'clock.
And as far as your group was concerned, your sister Marietta, was she within your group that went out to dinner?
Yes. Yep.
And beyond sort of your younger sister Marietta, did you have other sort of immediate family with you on this trip as well?
My mother was with us as well.
And with regard to your sister Marietta and your mother, what, if anything, was there as far as where were each of them staying?
So they had their own room. I think it was a couple away from us on the 5th floor.
Is that the top floor as far as this hotel is?
Yes.
concerned? Now, once you arrived back from dinner, where was it that you and your group went?
We go to the pool area. The kids can swim. We ring in the new year at the pool bar, watching it on the TVs, and then watching the fireworks.
Now, when you came back to the hotel and you went at some point to the pool area. Your sister Marietta, do you know where she went?
She actually, when we got back from dinner, she went up to her room with my mom and essentially put my mom to bed because she didn't want to be up anymore. But she went to go change as well.
Now, when you came
This is leading
down
to
the
some
pool
kind of
area,
argument.
as far as Mr. O'Keefe and or Ms. Reed was concerned, did you see them in that area?
I saw John, I want to say around 10:30-ish. I don't know the exact time. It was definitely before midnight.
And where in relation to the hotel did you see him at 10:30?
He was standing behind me at the pool bar.
And at some point does your sister come out to the pool area after putting your mother to bed?
Yeah, so right before I saw John at the pool bar, I saw my sister. She came out and she was visibly upset.
And, Your Honor, in regard, excuse me, to the instruction that you would request about this maybe.
All right, thank you. So, jurors, you're about to hear testimony about certain conduct or behavior allegedly committed by Ms. Reed. Be mindful that the defendant is not charged with committing any crimes other than those charged within the indictments. The witness's testimony may not and indeed must not be considered by you as any evidence that the defendant has a bad character or as evidence that she has a propensity to commit the crimes with which she has been charged. You may not take the defendant's prior acts as a substitute for proof that the defendant committed the crimes charged here, but you may consider the acts solely on the limited issue of the state of mind of the defendant and the nature of her relationship with John O'Keefe as it might go to motive or intent. You may not consider this evidence for any other purpose. Specifically, you may not use it to conclude that if the defendant committed the act or acts, that she must also have committed the offenses with which she's charged. You can only use the evidence for the limited purpose of how it goes to the defendant's state of mind, the nature of her relationship with John O'Keefe, as it may go to motive. And just for the records, my findings are the same that I made at sidebar previously. Go ahead, Mr. Lally.
Thank you. Now, with regard to at some point your sister comes out to the pool area where you were, is that right?
Correct.
And do you know where Mr. O'Keefe was at that point?
I do not know.
And
What
when your
happened to him
sister
standing
comes out
behind
to
you?
the pool area, what happened?
She said,
Objection.
Yeah, that's sustained. I thought you were doing something else.
When your sister comes out to the pool area, how would you describe her demeanor when she comes
Objection.
No, I'll allow that.
she was frustrated.
And at some point, did you have a conversation, without regard to what the conversation was, at some point, did you have a conversation with her about something that had just happened?
Yes.
Now, following that conversation with your sister, at some point subsequent to that, Mr. O'Keefe come back out to the pool.
After I spoke with her, yes, he came out to the pool area.
And do you know about how long a period of time it was between the time that your sister came out to the pool area and Mr. O'Keefe came out?
I mean, I would say approximately 20 minutes, but I don't really know exact timing.
Now, when Mr. O'Keefe came back out, did you have any conversation with him?
I did.
And can you describe that conversation?
All right, is this the instruction that you were talking about instead of the other one? All right, so jurors, I have another instruction for you. So you're about to hear evidence of statements made by John O'Keefe. Is that accurate now, Mr. Lally?
Yes.
All right. These statements are being admitted only for a limited purpose of establishing John O'Keefe's state of mind. You're not to consider this testimony as proof that the defendant has a bad character or propensity to commit crimes. The testimony of witnesses recounting conversations with Mr. O'Keefe can only be used as they go to the defendant's motive or intent on January 28th or 29th, and only if you find that the defendant was aware of Mr. O'Keefe's state of mind at the time of the crime and would be likely to respond to it. There need not be direct evidence that the defendant learned of Mr. O'Keefe's state of mind, so long as you reasonably can infer from the evidence that she did learn of it. Okay, Mr. Alex.
This is subject to our objection.
Yes. Yep.
So, Ms. Sullivan, if I could take you back again. So Mr. O'Keefe comes out, you have a conversation with him. Can you describe to the jury what that conversation was?
I turned around and I was pretty shocked to see him. I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Nothing." I said, "Did Etta and Karen have words?" And he said, "I don't know." And I said, "Well, that's not what Etta said." And I asked him if everything was okay. And at that time, his phone was lighting up, and it looked like calls and texts, and it said Karen on his phone.
After you make that observation, what, if anything, did you say to John?
I asked him if he needed to take it, and he said, "Yes, she's crazy. I got to take care of this."
And was that the last time that you saw him on New Year's Eve?
It is.
Now, turning your attention to the following day, New Year's Day, did you see either Mr. O'Keefe or Ms. Reed at all on that day?
I did not. I saw the children, but we didn't see them that day. No.
Now, turning your attention to the following day, being January 2nd, what was sort of the plan as far as what was going on that day?
Our hotel has a private island. The hotel we stay at has a private island, and we rented all 8 of the cabanas between the 60 of us that were there. And when the cabanas went on sale, I had reached out to John and asked him if he wanted me to get him one. And he said, sure. So I booked one for him, and he paid me for that cabana. So we all went out that morning. And it was probably around, 10 o'clock in the morning, and they weren't there yet. And so I sent him a text and I said, are you coming, or do you want me to sell this cabana? Because there was other, couples there. At least he could have made, the money back. And he asked me who was there. And I said, everybody. And I named off a couple names. I'm not really sure. But I said, everybody's here.
And when you said that, how did Mr. O'Keefe respond?
He said, well, apparently I made out with your sister the other night, according to Karen.
Now, is that the first time that you had heard that?
Yes.
So fair to say whatever you had heard from your sister on December 31st was not that?
Objection.
No, I'll allow that.
Correct.
And what was your reaction when Mr. O'Keefe told you this?
Objection.
I'll allow it.
I was shocked. I immediately found my sister and said, did you make out with John?
Objection.
Sustained.
Now, when you went to talk to your sister, who was it that your sister was with when you went to talk to her?
I don't recall who was standing near her. Maybe my mom. I don't know.
As far as your sister was concerned at that time, was she dating someone?
Yes,
And the person that she was dating, was that person on the trip as well?
he was. Yes.
And was that person that she was dating that was on the trip as well? Were they at the cabanas on that day?
They were. Yes.
Now, as far as you have some conversation in regard to your sister, and then at some point you go back and have further conversation with Mr. O'Keefe.
Yeah, I said I texted him back. I said, I just talked to Etta. She said, absolutely not. That did not happen.
Objection.
That's sustained. I'll strike that.
So she can say what John said, but she can't say
At
what
some
somebody
point
else said.
after that exchange, did Mr. O'Keefe and or Ms. Reed and or the kids come out to the cabana area?
They did. Yes.
And at any point, how would you describe sort of how Mr. O'Keefe and or Ms. Reed was acting when they came out to the cabana?
But Karen immediately went in the water. I just recall her being like floating in the ocean for a good chunk of the day. John was hopping around from the different cabanas, talking to people. One of my favorite pictures of him is with my son from that day.
Did you have any conversation with Mr. O'Keefe once he came out to the command area?
No, we kind of just kept it light. We didn't really talk about anything that had happened. I was just kind of trying to stay out of it for now.
And following sort of the Cabana situation or the Cabana day, what happened then?
So post that day, I think I saw John one other time. I saw him in the pool. It was the one time that him and I were alone. He didn't seem like he was himself.
I'll allow it.
He seemed distant, and I asked him if he was okay. And he kind of just, shrugged it off. And I said, are you happy? And he kind of, just rolled his eyes and shrugged it off. I said, well, something along the lines of life is too short to not be happy. And he goes, well, Laura, it is what it is. And I did ask him if he wanted to talk about it. I said, do you want to talk about it? And he's like, not really.
So following that exchange in the pool area, when was the next time that you saw him?
I had spoken to him. We all went on the Jolly Pirate. We had all bought tickets in advance, so we had basically rented the whole boat for everybody to go. Had bought 4 tickets, and we had gotten a bus from our hotel. And he didn't show up for the bus and wasn't answering my calls or my texts. And then we finally got down to where the boat was. The boat was about to leave, and he messaged me. He's like, not going to make it. The kids slept late. And so I didn't think anything of it. Then after that, I saw him and Karen the night before they left. And they ended up leaving a day or two early so that the kids could get back to school.
And when you saw them, where was that in relation to?
Right outside the hotel is a marketplace that has a bunch of restaurants and arcade. I was sitting at the 5 o'clock somewhere bar that looks into the arcade with my best friend Val, and my friends Dave and Laura and Karen and John walked up.
What, if any, conversation did you have with either Mr. O'Keefe or the defendant at that time?
Karen grabbed me and she said, hey, I'm sorry. I thought I saw something that I didn't, and I would like to pay for some of your sister's room.
And how did you respond to that?
I said it's absolutely not necessary. Just an apology will do.
And did she persist in wanting to pay for the room?
She did.
And how so?
She just said, I will apologize, but something along the lines of, I want to pay for some of her room. Can I just have her room number? I don't remember if I gave her the room number or not. I don't really know.
And with regard to that trip, when was the next time, or when was the last time that you saw it?
So the day that they were leaving, I saw him by the pool. He came up, he gave me a big hug. He said, I love you. This was a great trip. Thank you so much. And I said, well, you're definitely in again for next year. And he said, absolutely. And that was the last time I physically saw him.
So that conversation, just turning back for a moment, as far as with regard to Ms. Reed, you know what day that would have been, as far as in relation to when they were leaving? Early January 32nd?
I want to say it was the 5th. I want to say it was January 5th.
Now, after Ruben, did you have any conversation with Mr. O'Keefe after that?
I talked to him via text a couple times about a couple different things, but one of them was, as I mentioned, we start planning a year in advance. And I said, rooms are coming available. Are you in? And he said, let me recover from this trip first.
Now, ma'am, if I could turn your attention to Saturday, January 29th, 2022. Recall that day?
I do.
And at some point that morning or during that day, you get a call.
I did. I received a call from.
I'll hear that she received a call from someone.
I received a call from my aunt.
And what did you learn in the call from your aunt?
Objection.
I'll want it.
That John O'Keefe had passed away.
And after you hung up the phone with your aunt, what did you do with that?
I
I hear this subject to striking.
I called him. I called anybody's number that I had associated with the family. I ended up calling Kaylee. I texted Kaylee. I texted Karen.
And without any regard to what Kaylee said, did Kaylee respond to you via text?
She did.
And then at some point, did the defendant, Ms. Reed, respond to you as well?
She did.
Was that a phone call or a text, or how did she respond?
It was a text later that afternoon.
And do you recall what she said in the text?
She said, "Hi, Laura. John has passed." And
Do you recall what, if anything, you responded to that?
I said, "Oh my God, what happened?" And she said, "We found him in the snow at 5 a.m.
And what, if anything, did you ask her, or how did you respond?
I said, "What happened?" I just recall, kind of going into a tailspin, asking a bunch of questions. And she mentioned, she said, "I don't know. We were both at the same party. I didn't go in. I went home."
I may have a moment.
Yes.
So far, I believe her perspective. She's not casting aspersions. She's stating facts. She's not Botoxing anything.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have nothing further for this witness. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Sullivan.
Good afternoon.
You were not present at the Waterfall Bar and Grill on January 28th of 2022 in Canton.
I was not.
You were not present at 34 Fairview Road in Canton on January 29th of 2022.
It's not.
Yet you'll agree with me that Michael Proctor, the state police trooper, visited you at your home all the way in Pembroke, Massachusetts on February 8th of 2022
Yes.
to interview you.
Yes.
Nothing further.
Anything, Mr. Lanning?
Just briefly, as far as Trooper Proctor coming to your house, was he alone, or who, if anyone else, was he with when he came?
He was with another trooper,
Okay. And do you recall who that trooper was?
Trooper Fanning.
Nothing further on.
It's all in there. Your next witness, Mr. Lanning?
Yes, Your Honor. The call will call Ms. Marietta Sullivan.
Counsel, I'll see you while we're waiting for this witness.
Here comes the sister. Obviously, Karen thought she witnessed something and was totally off base. And she did apologize for it and wanted to make amends. Will you stop?
Do you solemnly swear the evidence given to the court and jury in the case now hearing the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
My mouse tends to double.
All right, Mr. Lally, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name?
Sure. My name is Marietta Sullivan. Last name is Sullivan.
And where do you live?
Right now I live in Plymouth.
And how long have you lived in?
Since July of the past summer, so not even a year yet.
And do you work there?
I do.
And what do you do?
I'm a director at a memory care community.
How long have you been doing it?
Just over a year.
Now, do you have any siblings?
I do.
And how many siblings do you
I have two,
have? Older, younger?
both older,
And brother, sister?
brother and sister,
And your sister, what is her?
Laura Sullivan.
And what is sort of the age difference between yourself and your sister?
We are 10 years apart.
Now, if I could turn your attention to New Year's, specifically 2021 into 2022. Do you recall that time frame?
I do.
And do you recall where it was that you were or where you were going for that time?
Yes, sir. We were going to Aruba for a family trip.
And is that sort of an annual family trip?
It has become since then. It was the first time I had attended.
And do you recall sort of the time frame on that trip as far as when you were leaving, when you were coming?
Yeah. So we left on Friday the 31st, and we returned the next week, Friday the 7th.
And when you say we, who is we?
My mother and I flew out together with another group of people to meet my sister and brother-in-law down in Aruba.
And at that time, so to meet them down there, had your sister Laura, had she flown down prior to you?
She had, yes.
And at that particular time, were you dating someone?
I was seeing somebody, yes.
And the person that you were seeing, was that person coming on the trip as well?
He was, yeah, the day after we got there.
So your sister arrives on the 30th, you arrive on the 31st, and the person you were seeing arrives on the 1st.
Yes.
Now, when you arrive there, do you know about how many people were on this trip?
I would say over 30, upwards of, yeah, I would say over 30 is the best estimate I could give you.
And as far as this trip was concerned, do you recall where you stayed?
Yep, we stayed at the Renaissance Aruba.
Is that someone that you stayed on this occasion as well as subsequent occasion?
Yes.
And on the 31st, when you and your mother arrived, do you recall about what time of day it was that you got there?
So our flight landed around 3:30-ish. I would say we weren't at the hotel much later than that.
And with regard to the hotel has a lobby area, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Can you describe to the jury
Another
sort of
dumb
what does
question.
that layout look like? What is the lobby?
Sure. So right when you walk in the front doors, right in front of you is the check-in desks, 3 or 4 of them in front of you. To the left of you, when you come in, is a hallway to one side of the hotel. To the right of you is a bank of elevators that leads to another hallway that leads to the other first floor side of the hotel. You're in a big lobby, and then directly across from where the elevators are is the entrance to the pool area.
And when you arrived there at some point in time on the late afternoon of the 31st, you obviously check into your room.
Mhm.
And then following that, where do you go?
So we checked into our room, and then happy hour was starting around 4:30. So we met everybody down at the pool for that time.
Is there a bar in that area of the pool?
Yes, pool bar.
And so when you get down to the pool bar area, who, if anyone specifically, did you see or did you run into?
So first ran into my sister, gave her a hug, the rest of the kids and my brother. As soon as I got into the pool, I ran into Johnny and a couple of our other friends that were sitting at the pool bar down there.
And with reference to who you referred to as John, what's his last name?
John O'Keefe.
And that was someone that you knew at the time, is that correct?
Yes.
And how did you know his face?
He was a very, very dear family friend. He was very close to my sister, subsequently became very close to me and my family as a result. And he was my nephew's godfather.
And fair to say that you had known him for some substantial period of time?
Yeah, since Ben's father unfortunately passed away.
So at this point in time, when we're talking about turning from 2021 to 2022, how long had you known Mr. O'Keefe at that point?
Oh man. Probably about 8, 9 years. It's as long as my nephew's been alive.
And when is it that you would see, or how often would you see Mr. O'Keefe?
Family parties, any family party that we threw, kids' birthday parties, and my sister's Christmas party that she would throw every year.
And how would you describe sort of the nature of your relationship with Mr. O'Keefe?
He was similar to a big brother to me. He was somebody who was there for my sister during her darkest times. So I really respected him for that. But yeah, he was a big brother and a family friend.
Now,
Great guy.
when you saw Mr. O'Keefe at the pool bar after you arrived there, what, if any, conversation did you have with him, or what, if anything, were the two of you doing around that?
So I went up to him in the pool. He had his Alabama hat on. He expressed to me that he was excited to watch the Alabama football game at the pool bar. Given the circumstances, we were in a beautiful tropical place, and he got to watch his favorite college team play football. And he said that's all he really wanted to do for the day, was be able to watch that game.
Now, at this point in time that you're talking to Mr. O'Keefe, were you aware of him dating anybody? Had you met anybody that he was dating at that time?
I had not met the person that he was dating. I had heard about her through family friends and other people that were on the trip.
So as far as the other sort of family events that you would see Mr. O'Keefe at, Ms. Reed or his girlfriend at that time wasn't there with him?
No.
So after the time that you spent at the pool bar that afternoon, do you recall what else you did that evening?
Yep. So most of us in the group had dinner reservations. I believe they were around 7 p.m. and we were all getting ready to leave the pool bar to get picked up around 6:30.
And as far as a fairly large group that went out to dinner that night?
Yeah, most of us.
And was Mr. O'Keefe part of that group that went out to dinner?
He was not.
Do you recall about what time it was that you got back to or returned to the hotel?
Most of us got back a little after 9. Taxis were kind of crazy to get, so little after 9.
And when you got back to the hotel, where did you?
I went upstairs to check on my mom. She had gone in a bank of taxis before me, so I went upstairs to make sure that she was up there and safe and in the room.
And so however long you spent up in the room with your mother, at some point did you come back?
I did.
And when you came back down, by down, I mean, do you recall where you were staying in the hotel?
Yep. So we were on the 4th floor of the hotel. So I took the elevator up and then I took it back down to the lobby.
And at that point in time, when you're getting back from dinner, going up to the room and coming back down, were you aware of where Mr. O'Keefe and his niece and nephew were staying?
I knew where they were staying, yes. Room-wise, yep.
And where was that in relation to the lobby?
1st floor.
So lobby's on the 1st floor, their rooms are on the 1st floor.
Yes.
So when the elevator gets down to the lobby level, you get out. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And what if anything?
So you have to
Sorry.
say, okay.
You just have to answer yes or no.
Yes, sorry.
That's okay. So the elevator gets sent down to the lobby. You walk out. Who, if anyone, do you see when you come out?
So when the elevator opens up, the first person I saw was the attendant standing behind the desk. I didn't see anybody else in the lobby with me until I stepped out. When I stepped out, I looked to my left and I saw Johnny coming in through the first set of outside doors.
Now, as far as Mr. O'Keefe was concerned, was there any other sort of term that you would use to refer to him?
Johnny or Godfather.
Your Honor, I think this may be appropriate.
All right. So folks, I'm going to say again that first instruction I gave you with the last witness, that you're about to hear testimony about certain conduct or behavior allegedly committed by the defendant. Ms. Reed is not charged with committing any crimes other than those charged within the indictment. So this witness's testimony may not and must not be considered by you as any evidence that the defendant has a bad character or as evidence that she may have a propensity to commit the crimes with which she's been charged. You may not take the defendant's prior acts that you'll hear about as a substitute for proof that the defendant committed the crimes charged here. But you may consider the act solely on the limited issue of the defendant's state of mind and the nature of her relationship with John O'Keefe as it might go to motive or intent. You may not consider this evidence for any other purpose. Specifically, you may not use it to conclude that if the defendant committed these acts, that she must also have committed the offenses with which she's been charged. You can only use the evidence for the limited purpose of how it goes to the defendant's state of mind, motive, and the nature of her relationship with John O'Keefe. And for the same findings that I made at sidebar.
Proceed, John?
Yes.
Thanks. So you walk out of the elevator, you're by yourself, correct?
Yes.
And you see Mr. O'Keefe. Could you see where Mr. O'Keefe was in relation to the lobby or where he was coming from?
He was coming from the outside doors into the lobby,
Is that where the pool bar is located?
opposite side.
Opposite.
Yes.
And when you see him come in, who, if anyone, did you see with him initially?
Nobody with him.
And what, if anything, was he doing or how was he acting sort of when he came?
So he sort of stumbled in. I came out of the elevator and my initial response to him was, "Whoa, you okay?" I actually said, "Whoa, Godfather, are you okay?" But yeah, he was stumbling into the lobby.
And did you go over to him at that point?
I did. I went up to him and I gave him a hug.
And what happened then?
I pulled back. He was glassy-eyed, looking above me. We never made eye contact. He was looking above me. It looked like he was looking for someone. I asked him, "Where are you going?" assuming that he would be coming to the pool bar to meet us. He kept looking around and he indicated that he was going that way and pointed toward a bank of rooms to our right. And I said, "Well, you should go that way." And I stepped back and I guided him toward the area that he was going.
As far as the bank of rooms to the right, you indicated that you were familiar or aware of where Mr. O'Keefe was and where the children were. Is that correct?
I know they were on the first floor. I'm not 100% positive as to where exactly their rooms were.
And if you know, did you know whether or not that Mr. O'Keefe was staying in the same room as Patrick and Kaylee at that point?
I didn't know if they were staying in the same room or not, no.
So you point him in that direction, and what happened?
So I pointed in that direction. He walked off. I continued out to the pool bar when I heard very loudly his name screamed across the lobby very angrily, and it made me stop in my tracks.
And when you stop in your tracks, what happened?
I started to turn around to come back in. So once you go out to the pool bar, you kind of go around a corner and you go out of view. So I turned around to go back in. As I'm going back in, I hear someone yell, "Who the fuck was that?" And as I come around the corner, I see Mr. O'Keefe walking toward a woman. And he said, excuse me. He said, "Calm down, that's Laura's little sister."
And what happened?
When I came back around the corner, I said, after Mr. O'Keefe said, "Calm down, that's Laura's little sister," I said, "Hi, nice to meet you." That's when Miss Reed's head snapped up, and she very loudly told me to go fuck myself across the lobby. And I said, "Yeah, fuck you too," and walked away.
And just to be clear, when you say Miss Reed, this is someone that you became familiar with as the trip went along?
This was my first interaction with her. I had never been fully introduced to her at all. I just had seen her sitting by the side of the pool when I had been talking to Johnny earlier in the day.
And the person you know to be Miss Reed, do you see her in the courtroom today?
I do.
Could you just describe as to where she's seated or an article of clothing that she's wearing?
Sure, she's in a black and white checkered blazer. She's 2 people in from you.
As far as the defendants beyond the yelling, what, if anything, did you observe as far as her demeanor or how she was acting at the time that this interaction was going on?
She was just very loud. She very, energetically screamed for me to go fuck myself. She was waving her hands. Johnny was trying to calm her down. And after I said, "Yeah, fuck you too," I went out to the pool bar, so I didn't see much after that.
And could you hear anything as far as when you were walking out to the pool bar, as far as any other conversation between the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe?
Not after that first time, no.
You go back you go out to the pool bar, and who, if anyone, did you talk to?
I went straight up to my older sister, Laura, who was out to dinner with the couple the night before. And I said,
I'll allow this part.
I went up to her and I looked at her and I said, John O'Keefe's girlfriend. And she looked at me and said, Karen. And I said, yeah, you guys like her? She said, yeah, she's okay. And I said, well, she sucks.
Now I know who to keep looking at.
Now,
That's where Jen
following
was
that,
looking. Was that Karen?
that particular, at any point in time later in that evening, did you see either Mr. O'Keefe or Ms. Reed?
Which was the day that we rented cabanas on the island.
That skipping is
Yeah,
not
I'll see it sidebar quickly.
that skipping is not me. I didn't do that. I did not do that. I wonder. Let me check and see if there was more. I'm checking to see. That's where it ended. That's where it ended. It was very abrupt. Well, that's it for the afternoon. So this is where they're casting doubt into Karen and John's relationship. Whether it was a good one. It'll be interesting to see where they go from here. So we will leave that here. Very short afternoon. I'm going to assume there'll be more tomorrow. And maybe I'll find out what happened to the feed. Because it started skipping and then it was just gone. So maybe somebody tripped over a cable. We'll leave it there for now. So we will say goodbye for now. And I'm trying to cue this up to be correct, but you know I'm going to screw it up. So until the next time, take care and God bless. See, I screwed it up.